Triskian has taken some reforms to his city, but it's still a place you might want to be cautious about who you trust in.
It is very Stepford wivesy. Everything is just a little too perfect on the surface.
And that really gets us into one of the places that we can start with the lore of Luclin. Luclin is a very lore-rich place. It told us a lot of stuff that we never knew, both in EverQuest 1 and presumably in EverQuest 2. That's where we know the Shisar are, and we find out about Luclin, the goddess herself, the chosen Akevans. But one of the interesting things that really impacts the history of Norrath is the Combine Empire. So the Combine Empire existed on Norrath and then basically got into an internal civil war. And to escape the Combine loyalists after their emperor was poisoned, they teleported and by accident ended up on the moon. And that's what the founding city was in EverQuest, was Shadowhaven. And that's where the loyalists originally landed. But the enemies, the other side of the Civil War, was
The Inquisition.
The Inquisition. They landed right after them and followed them and started the Civil War all over again on the moon. And so that's where you had your two core cities, where you had Sanctus Seru, and then you had Shadowhaven. And then eventually Shadowhaven became the neutral city, where people who were just kind of done with the Civil War and Lycia Cata moved out to Cata Castellum, which we do not have correct in EQ2 right now.
That is correct. Cata Castellum has been mentioned, so we have reason to believe it is still intact in our wilderness, but at this time it is completely unreachable.
And Shadowhaven itself, which you can see over here, was underneath the land. It was actually inside of Luclin itself.
But at this time, was essentially built onto the lunar core in order to tap from the powers natural to it to enhance the Spire network. From what we've found out in the years since, the district cult actually grew large enough to become the city itself. So when you see it again, you'll now hear it by that name, Fordell Midst.
And you're absolutely correct, Cirrus. No one escapes the Luclin Inquisition. And
Nope.
Difference between the two cities, again, this place is very, very lore rich. Cata Castellum is a very dark place. It's on the dark side of the moon because Luclin itself has a dark side and a light side. And on the dark side of the moon, there are also vampires there. And it's very rich Gothic architecture. It's, very dark. You've got gorgeous stained glass, dark wood furniture. And then you've got Sanctus Seru, which is very, very bright, very pristine. Like Rob mentioned, very Stepford wives. Everything's a little too perfect. It's very shiny, white marble, gold accents, and very rigid in its structure.
Although my dimension, not perfect exterior as you may imagine, still hides some pretty dark secrets, and so does our heir to the Inquisitor. But I'm not gonna spoil it, so...
So we have a question that I can't answer because I haven't been in the beta yet. Do we know if Caraphim is going to be a part of the expansion? Do we know anything that what's going on? Has he been mentioned at all so far?
Thus far, not that I'm aware of. I haven't seen him, but Gannor probably knows a bit more about that than I do.
At this stage, the ultimate fate of Roenthyr and Caraphim is still highly unknown. The only hint that we have so far is that when the lunar surface reassembled, the primary rifts, the great cracks that were left behind when the pieces came together, suddenly erupted with gigantic crystalline mountain ranges. Now, there is some prismatic energy in these crystals. It does radiate off in small bits. We've seen some aggressive nodules floating in the air in some areas. But beyond this crystal formation, we are at this time clueless.
So the lands that we have that we know of right now in EQ2, in the expansion, is the Racklands, and the Racklands you can see in this kind of light blue. So they're going to encompass parts of the Scarlet Desert and parts of the Grey. If you are not familiar with the Grey, when the Shisar fled Norath after Khazak-Thul released the green mist on them, they fled to Luclin, and then they basically took the area now known as the Grey and sucked all the air out of it, because if the green mist is airborne, you can't have it coming to you if there's no air. So we have part of the Grey, we have part of the Scarlet Desert, and then you have the Blinding Coast, which is going to be in yellow here, and that features part of Mons Latalis. Then you have the Aurelian Coast, which has kind of got a little bit of Shade Weaver's Thicket. It's this purple color, and Dawn Shroud Peaks. Shade Weaver's Thicket was the newbie starting zone for the Vashir, who were also bloomed to the moon in another civil war. So lots of people who were in civil wars ended up on the moon. You have the erudites of Paniel fighting with the erudites of Erut, and in that magical battle, they blew part of the Kirin lands, and the Kirin ended up on Luclin and became the Bashir. And so you see that, and then the last place that we have is Sanctus there. And then, of course, a little bit of Fordell Mist, which is kind of part of Shadowhaven, as Gannor mentioned.
At this time, Charval has also not been revealed. There's been very limited mention of it, so we're going to have to see how they handle that.
Do we know if we're going to need to use Enduring Breath or something like that in the Grey in EQ?
We actually do not. Since the surround lapsed, the statues that were creating the shield dome have also been severely damaged. The Grey has become aerated again. It can be freely walked through, but it does still remain heavily haunted, gravimetrically unstable, and the occasional forsaken revenants.
So, the first place that you land when you land in the expansion is you land in a spire built by Grieg Beneficus, I think was his last name. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think. Well, I don't know about the name, but that is where you land, yes.
Greg Vinificus, that's right.
So,
now, we don't know for certain that he built that spire. It is one of the oldest structures on Luclin that is not of Achevan construction, but it is generally attributed to him, and the lore around it does wrap up heavily with his history. He's a bit of a mysterious figure these days, heavily referenced.
So, Grieg was one of the funniest characters or places for me in EQ1, because the history behind him is that he's the geomancer of the Combine Empire, and when they land originally on the moon, he's like, I just want to go back home. I want to go back home to Norath. And so he starts doing research and trying to open up a portal. And this predates by a large amount when we actually get there in EverQuest 1's history. So he's there, he's trying to figure out the teleporters, he's trying to activate the magics. And at this point, Luclin, all of these mortal races from Norath show up, and she is not very pleased about it. And she's really not pleased that he's trying to open teleportation magic, which will allow more mortal and or go, that basically people will be able to go back and forth between Luclin and Norath. And so she actually curses him and torments his mind. And that's where you get his zone in EverQuest 1, which is just madness. Everybody turns into different illusions all the time, and you can just see how his mind is haunted. He's incredibly powerful magically, but he is not all there.
The curse that racks Greg's End, which was originally intended as a Combine colony after he'd suffered a little bit of an exile, is based on the same kind of principle as the shadow sickness we see occurring a lot with Achevans themselves. In the conceptual sense, the shadow, as a metaphysical object, contains the inner subconscious, and darker aspects of a person's own mind and heart. Kevans can use them to read you, to speak with each other, but when a person's own shadow is unleashed and broken free from its dormant state, it begins to distort reality around them. Dreams start to manifest in the real world. Subconscious desires begin to twist the physical and non-physical aspects of the being. And in Grieg's own case, where it was the thickest, we actually saw his entire form changed into a towering, purple, almost genie-looking monstrosity. It is a very potent, semi-divine power that has encapsulated him and all of those surrounding him.
So while we don't know that he was the one who put the spires back together and reactivated them, we can at least know that part of the research that did it was him, because that's what he was originally trying to do. I think it's interesting to kind of focus on what we're actually doing right now in NORAD. There are 3 events that are kind of tied in together going on. First, and in character and in lore reasons, this makes absolutely no sense to me. Maybe somebody else can find a reason that it makes sense, but we are building tributes in Antonica and the Common Lands to dragons, even though dragons have attacked in Kinos and Freeport many times and are regularly trying to destroy the world. We just decided that we wanted to build, statues to our dragon overlords. And to do this, they're utilizing the bodies, so we're killing dragons to build statues of dragons. And these dragons, yes, these dragons are attacking 4 particular spires, Alteran spires of note on Norath. That's Nectulos, Everfrost, Thundering Steps, and Loping Plains. These spires were all spires that were inactive and destroyed in the Age of Turmoil, and they were only actually rebuilt in the construction of the Alteran spires in the Age of Destiny. The Age of Destiny, for those not familiar with the EverQuest timeline, is where we kind of started in EverQuest 2. We're not in the Age of Destiny anymore because we have the Ages in Prophecy, and we're kind of in an epoch that doesn't really have a name right now. And then you've got the Blood of Luclin prequel quest, where the duality has you recreating Luclin gating objects. So to get to Luclin in EverQuest 1, you had to go to a spire, and there was a NPC there that you hailed, and that NPC would then give you a shard from the spires itself, and that shard allowed you to be transported up to them. And it looks like Alcabor / D'Artagnan is recreating those gating objects. And then on the other hand, we're investigating Akeevan actions and relics that were to us during the Altar of Malice expansion. And the idea that is that the duality is afraid of the Shissar's return because they have had such a massive impact on Norath, and because they can be so destructive on Norath. And so he's putting a bunch of different actions into place to try to get one step ahead.
Might I mention that the dragon monuments are done? You can see them in Common Lands and Antonica. I think it looks like a giant shiny statue of Darathar.
Yes, again, it defies all logic as to why we are creating statues to the dragon.
It's worth noting that there is a more existential fear where the Shissar are involved. The calendar, the second of the monoliths, actually is what inspired the solution to beating and ending the Curiform threat. And it was not long after achieving that feat that the duality realized that the defeat was also included in the calendar itself. So this Shissarian relic became its own self-fulfilling prophecy. Now it is a known fact that the Emperor of the Shissar, Sraeshza, is a powerful chrono force of some kind. We don't know if he wields chrono magic or simply sees across the veil of time, but the fact that he could see this coming and has been able to adjust his society, his followers, and his plans to compensate for each of these major changes listed on the calendar, including the one we're now experiencing, naturally leads Alcabor and D'Artagnan to worry what else might this imposing and ancient figure have in store for us? What could he possibly be trying to gain from having predicted such monumental changes across such a great span?
We also have another question. When you were talking about the dreams and the influences that are affecting the different Luclinite creatures, um, Cirrus asks if Moral Thule or Terrace Thule have influence over those dreams.
Moral Thule and Terrace Thule, when they influence dreams, usually their power is over the slumbering mind. And that's where the danger of the liberated shadows comes in, is that they are actually pulling what's inside the mind naturally into the reality. Because the individual is not actually sleeping, the reach that's required for the siblings of dreams to get to them or to control or restrain them is far greater than it would be for any other mortal being. They're actually having their inner thoughts bleeding out into physical truth. And anyone who has studied solipsism knows that is a terrifying state to be in.
So, the other thing that's going on, the most obvious thing is the Shissar. And I mentioned how the Shissar left Norath
The other
because
mortal being.
Khazad-Thul released the group, and it absolutely devastated them. The Shissar have done a lot of interesting things, and it's related to the Akevans. So the Akevans, Ra, you've been very interested in them. You want to talk about them?
Well, again, Gannor knows far more than I do about friends, fiends, I guess, because they're generally pretty hostile and xenophobic for the most part, but that stems back to the ideological differences that came during their civil war, which I don't remember when that happened, but it was no time recently. Very long time ago. You had the Kavithan correct me if I'm wrong, and you had the ones that followed, the Tenhara, who was the priestess, um, the other. I'm having a brain fart right now, I apologize. The, Kavithan followed a Kilhara, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Akel Hara was the original High Priestess of Luclin, an
Yeah.
Akeevan that was specially created to act as a mortal vessel for Luclin's will.
Yes.
But because Luclin herself is dual-natured and everything she creates is dual-natured, she then created a Tenhara as a sort of sister slash Akel herself. Yep.
Well, and you have the. I think it was the ones who followed Akil who were not as adverse to outside influences. They kind of had a civil war over whether or not it's okay to speak common and interact with the. I'm gonna mispronounce this and I apologize. The Mataru. No. The Sivuela, which means outsider in Fleshless Tongue, I believe.
Mortal specifically is the literal
Yeah.
translation.
And it's interesting to note, I think, that we have a lot of different races in EverQuest, but the Akevans are actually the only race that an official dictionary ever came out for, and they have very specific translations of their names. So one of the things we might try to post or link on the YouTube video when it goes live is the actual Akevan dictionary and the Akevan translations. There's a couple of them out there. Some of those come from the pen and paper game. The pen and paper game has a translation of Akevan in it, but additionally, a lot of it people were players who were interested in the lore, who were piecing things out as they were raiding Bexthal and dealing with the different Akevan. So in EQ2, when you go see the different names, they have actual specific meanings, um, and they tie into their positions and power. Um,
Yep.
The
And
Akevans. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rob.
sorry, you go ahead. You go ahead.
The Akevans have a somewhat unique society versus what a lot of people typically expect in a modern racial type here in Norrath or beyond, they are extremely caste oriented and almost built up like you would imagine a hive of ants would operate. And so the individual words connected to each Akivan isn't just a name or identifier, but it is their literal place in society. And I do also want to take this chance to give a big shout out. I was one of those who helped with the multi-server effort to translate those words back in the day, but a huge portion of it and a lot of the collection of it, props to Arctura. I don't know where you are. And so the individual words were awesome. Thank you, and a huge shout out to the Safe House.
Yes, thank you so much. As someone who takes a keen interest in Akavan lore for roleplay purposes, yes, guilty pleasure, I like writing weird stuff. It's been immensely helpful to have that dictionary, just in order to like name stuff and get a better feel for what's going on. So yeah, thank you so much for having that resource out there for weirdos like me to use.
So right here, I'm showing a couple of screenshots from Vexthal, and you can see from EverQuest 1, it was very boring for the time, um, and how
Yeah, those.
they
If
had.
I may,
Yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. Those arches with the blue in them, the blue crystals. There's something like that at that settlement whose name I forget in Luclin. It's not a caven, but it does have those arches with the blue crystal in it. I know that's silly, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but
They look pretty though.
Their case system, Cirrus, is very similar to the Ixar. It is very case based on what and what they are. So let me pull up an example from when we were discussing this in our Discord. Just one second. So this is the Zen Diabo